So some of you may have been here over the last session. So just in case, I wanted to give the opportunity for anyone to kind of comment or reflect. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but we just wanted to open it up in case you had any reactions to anything from the last few sessions. I know we talked about behaviors make sense, talked about ambivalence last week, one size does not fit all really great topics about sort of changing the way that we think about and understand addiction. And so if anyone has any questions or comments or follow-up, you can feel free to put them in the chat, and I would be happy to follow up with you on that. We're talking here about creating the conditions for change, right? So there's a lot of information out there that talks about just, kind of letting people hit bottom, or you have to let go, you don't have any role. Well, for some people that might be the right fit, for a lot of people that actually is not the right fit. And there are a lot of ways in which we can help, and there are many things that family members can do, and we want to share some of those with you today and over the next few weeks. And so can new behaviors make more sense? How do we help, right? So there's two ways in which we talk about helping here: helping with awareness, helping from the inside, and helping with action, helping from the outside. And this is sort of a framework through which you can kind of think about the different skills that we're going to be talking about here. So again, today is helping with compassion. This little wheel gives us a visual of, and you'll see this throughout the training, you'll see it a couple times today, and you'll see it every week. This is just the map that we use to give us a quick reference point for the different skills that exist in the invitation to change model. So last week you can see that you were over here in the helping with understanding section. Behaviors do not make sense, or behaviors make sense. One size does not fit all, and ambivalence is normal. And then we're moving over here into the awareness section today, helping with awareness. And this is our little logo for that. And then in the center is our slide that reminds us that all of these skills, as with any skill, it's really, really important to practice. That we're probably not going to get it for the first time. So I guess we're already talking about self-compassion, right? We're not going to get it the first time. And so we really need to practice these skills kind of over and over. And as we do that, they become more natural. They can kind of become the default response. Or, sometimes after just slowing down a little bit, we can recognize like what it is we need to do in any given situation. So helping with self-compassion. This is just a quote. We have some of these interspersed throughout the slideshow. So, the most powerful relationship you will ever have is the relationship with yourself. The most powerful relationship you will ever have is the relationship with yourself. Pretty important, right? And I think as parents, and especially when we're dealing with substance use, it can be really easy to forget about ourselves. We're moving at a pace, there's a lot of adrenaline, there's a lot of fear, and we'll talk a little bit later about some of the things we've heard from parents, such as, I'll get to myself later, or how could I possibly do that when I'm so worried about my child? And while all of that is incredibly valid and understandable, we also just really want to focus on this idea that the most powerful relationship is with ourselves. So self-compassion, what family members may experience and hear, always an emergency. I'll get to myself after we ... I will always be there when you need me. It's a nice sentiment. And the truth is that it may not always be the best decision. Just give a personal example. My son really wanted me to drive him to school this morning instead of putting him in the carpool, because he likes his space and to stretch out. And I actually wanted to spend the time preparing for this training today because he matters to me and this training also matters to me. And I really wanted to do one last run through the slides, right? So in that moment, sort of explained to him why that was the decision I was making. And didn't really like it at first, but he understood, right? So that's just a little of example of using that decision-making process to consciously decide, is it best for me to kind of sacrifice what I need for what you need? I can't go out of the house because he might OD. Worked with many parents and who have experienced this, and it's incredibly terrifying. And if you're running on empty, and although we're all living in the house a lot these days, but if you're running on empty, you're not actually truly going to be able to be there and to show up for your loved one. My husband and I can find another night. I hear this a lot with couples that I work with, and I'm working with both parents. You know, time together with your partner gets pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed because there's so much to do, and there's so much worry, and there's so much tension, and there's so much fear. But parents really taking time to nurture their relationship. And, you know, that can be like a 20-minute walk around the block. It doesn't need to be a trip to the Caribbean. It's just that we need to really consciously turn our attention and our willingness towards cultivating those important relationships in our lives. An end to isolation. We need to keep this in the family. So very appropriate to the topic of self-compassion is all the shame that people feel around addiction. And having a child that's struggling around substances. And so again, part of the mission of the foundation and part of our goal in changing this conversation is so that people can start to feel like this is something that they can talk about, just the way they would talk about any other medical condition that their child was struggling with. We want family members to have that same permission and freedom around their substance use. If only I had not. So this idea that I'm going to blame myself, that I did this thing, if I had just done this thing differently, then they'd be okay, or maybe they wouldn't have gotten addicted, or maybe they wouldn't have gotten arrested, or whatever it is that happens. So, you know, I think part of this piece of self-compassion is just recognizing that we are limited in terms of how much control we have, right? When they're little and they're home all the time, we have a lot more control. But as our kids get older and move around out in the world, you know, there's a lot of stuff that they encounter. And I've worked with so many wonderful families who have just done a lot of good for their children, and yet still can feel this sense of, if I only I had or hadn't. And so we really want to work on having compassion for ourselves around the fact that our kids do have the ability to make their own choices. So that's kind of, the old stuff is really what we're used to hearing. And this is a slide that you may remember from last week. And this one appears throughout our training just as a little trigger that now we want to kind of shift focus, right? That what we're trying to offer to all of you with the invitation to change model is a new perspective. So we want to offer you a new perspective on how, why you can have hope, right? Why you can have self-compassion, why it's important. So self-compassion, and this is important because we're making a distinction here between self-compassion and self-care. Self-compassion is not encouragement to pamper yourself or forget your troubles, right? So when we talk about self-compassion, we're not talking about a manicure. We're not talking about just, oh, forget about it. Those things, can be helpful and important. And, sometimes it's important to just set something aside and not think about it. But when we're talking about self-compassion, we're talking about the encouragement to acknowledge and include yourself and your own experience with kindness, right? So it's not all about your child's needs. It's really about you and what do you need and how do you treat yourself with kindness. By including yourself with kindness, you're able to acknowledge the level of stress and emotion involved, which is big. Sometimes we don't even know we're stressed until we slow down and kind of feel, right? Deal more effectively with that stress. So we know that stress building up has all kinds of physical and emotional manifestations that are not good for us, and that if we kind of slow down and keep ourselves in the process and don't let that stress build up, then we're just in better shape physically and emotionally. We notice particularly toxic reactions to shame to direct some self-compassion towards ourselves. Notice particularly unself-compassionate reactions or isolation, right? So as we're tuning in and paying attention, we start to have this awareness of, how am I reacting to my shame? What am I doing with it? How am I making it worse? Am I increasing it? Am I judging myself for it? Or am I allowing that in and, kind of holding it in the way that she is in that little photograph. So to make space for kindness towards yourself, right? So I spoke a few minutes ago about we really need the gas in the tank. If we don't have the gas in the tank, the truth is we're actually not going to be that great of a caregiver anyway. We're going to be short-tempered. We're going to get sick. We're not really going to be able to be there in the way that we would want to be if we don't also have a tank full of gas. So I just want to invite you all to, if anything comes up for you as we're going along, to go ahead and put that in the chat, and Amy will circle back, and I'm happy to pause and take any comments or questions. So how does knowing all of this help, right? So understanding the importance and role of self-compassion. So it validates the difficulty and challenge of caring for someone struggling with substance use problems. Caregivers are under a tremendous amount of stress, whatever it is that we're caring for. And in this case, we're talking about substance use. And we know that that has a tremendous effect on your nervous system, right? And so we really want to validate that this is hard. And doesn't mean you're not strong, doesn't mean you can't handle it. It just means we want to kind of validate for ourselves this is hard. Gives you permission to care for yourself. So here is that idea of self-care. Caring about yourself makes room to understand what matters to you. What matters to me? Do I like reading? Do I like knitting? Do I like planting or gardening? These things can really, do I like music? These things can really drift when our life feels like it's on fire every day. And but by having that self-compassion, it allows us to bring some of those things back into our lives. It allows room for imperfections of learning new ways to help instead of just being blocked up by the judgment. So we're really trying to address any judgmental thinking. Helps us tolerate and accept moments we're not our best selves and the shame, embarrassment, or guilt associated with that. It allows space and energy for new responses and new paths, right? So if we're so bogged down with all that judgment and all that harshness, it doesn't really allow new ideas to flow in. And as we let go of some of that, it creates space. And in that space can flow some of these new skills. So I'm going to invite you, if this is something that you are up for, to participate in a meditation with us. And this is a meditation on holding our own shame. So if you're able, I'm going to ask you just to find yourself a comfortable position. If maybe you're not seated, but you're able to, that's possible for you, just taking a seat, comfortable seat, placing your feet on the ground or crossing your legs, and resting your hands in your lap. And if it's comfortable for you, closing your eyes. And if not, just relaxing your gaze. And this is an exercise that will help us to come into contact, connect with values around how we may want to treat ourselves when we're suffering and feeling pain, self-criticism, shame, and judgment. And just before we start the exercise, I'd just like you to take a few breaths, maybe coming into your body, inhaling and exhaling, noticing what's coming up for you. And if you happen to be located someplace where there's either a pen and a piece of paper nearby, you can go ahead and bring that in front of you. And if not, I just want you to imagine and use your imagination to imagine sitting in front of you is a pen and a piece of paper. And whether real or imagined, I'm going to ask you to write something down. So I invite you to think about one thing in your life. It might be in your history. It might be something about you or your identity that you would not want others to know. This may be something you feel significant shame about. You may fear that if others found out, they would think differently of you. It's likely that several things come to mind. And what I've asked of you is that you choose something that is a bit of a stretch. Not something that completely overwhelms you or results in you shutting down, but something that's sticky enough that you definitely do not like thinking about it. And I'd like you to take a few moments to write about that thing on the sheet of paper, whether it's real or imagined. And remember that no one will be asked to read it out loud. No one will see it or ask you to talk about it. And as you jot down your words, perhaps write about how you feel about this event or aspect of your identity. What thoughts do you have when you think about it? You keep it hidden because it feels shameful, or because you believe it makes you damaged or bad in some way. And when you're done, please fold up that paper, either real or imagined. And I'd like you to hold it in your hands. Take a moment to notice what it is like for you to be in contact with or to be holding that thing, that part of yourself, your history. Notice any urges you have, thoughts, judgments, anything that may be showing up for you. And we are now going to do an exercise relating to gently holding shame and also being open to compassion toward those aspects of yourself that you feel shame around. The first thing I would like you to consider is looking at a room of people. Maybe it could be people you know, people you don't know. Would you be willing to hold someone else's piece of paper? Consider that this piece of paper describes events or aspects of themselves that they may find disdainful, or perhaps things they would consider as being horrible, terrible things about themselves. And now think that other people in this group are thinking about the same thing in relation to holding your piece of paper with what you wrote on it. How do you imagine, and what do you imagine it would be like to allow someone to hold that for you, hold that for someone else? What does that bring up? And when you feel ready, just asking you to bring your attention to your breath. And taking a few breaths, noticing Any physical sensations? Any thoughts that are still lingering from that exercise? And if your eyes are closed, just opening them, coming back. And when you're ready, just opening your eyes, rejoining. So take a moment and see if there's any reflections that anyone has. This is actually an experience that we do in person when we do our trainings. And so people are writing with a pen on a piece of paper and holding this piece of paper and passing it to the person next to them and passing it back. So we, really wanted to get as close to that as possible. And imagery can be a really powerful way to do that. I just know that as a moderator, every time I do this, I really feel the power of it. So I'd welcome any comments, any reactions.
So I was thinking when you asked to imagine passing the paper, that made me anxious, but me receiving someone else's paper made it feel like it was a gift, like I was receiving a gift that somebody trusted me enough to hand me their shame paper.
Thank you so much. Yes, that is very interesting, and it's a very common experience. I'm not sure if it's because the people that were, the trainings that we're doing, like people are kind of naturally caregivers, or if it's just a human thing. But it certainly is an experience of like, I feel honored, right? That you would trust me with this. And yet that fear, that shame that we hold in, what will someone think of me? How will they react to me? How will that change our relationship? Thank you. And I just if anyone did write it down, you may want to think about where to put it. We all have a lot of laughing at the end, usually when we're, trying to find the shredder to stick it in. Or maybe you want to share it with somebody, right? Maybe there's a loved one that, that you do feel like you could share that with, or a a therapist or a religious person, just someone that you feel like you can trust, because we know that holding this kind of stuff for a long time is it's impactful. Rebecca, did you want to share?
Yeah, like I'm glad that I was able to hold on to it, because like the other person said, passing it to the next person, I'd be nervous about maybe how they feel about it, or not sure what they do with that information. But it's good to know that they may also be feeling the same exact way.
Right. That it's hard for all of us to hand it over, right? It's really hard. And I think, thank you. I think around, just because of the way that as a culture, we still don't understand substance use. There's just a tremendous amount of this feeling of like, how could I hand this over to somebody else? And so we're working on creating that sense of community. All right. Thank you very much for participating. Take some courage. So we'll talk a little bit. I've mentioned this idea of isolation. So isolation is an accelerator of pain. We might turn to it because it feels more natural. It feels safer in some way. But it's actually a short-term solution that we know increases our experience of pain. It doesn't help it. It doesn't lessen it. it actually increases it. And so there's a lot of importance around, recognizing here that you're not alone, right? The struggle can feel embarrassing, humiliating, and shameful, leading to desires to isolate and shut out the world. Increased risk of depression, anxiety, despair. This isn't on the slide, but I would just also say, like, potentially medical conditions, right? We know that stress lives in our body. A loss of sense of common humanity, which undermines self-compassion, right? So we start to feel like I'm different from, I'm separate from, I'm not a part of. And that makes it harder for us to care for ourselves in the way that we need to. So are there people that you can talk to? Is there anyone that understands? Is there a friend who's maybe more just understanding in general? Maybe they don't understand substance use, but maybe they're just a more compassionate person. Is there a family member that you know that they're really good at, not sharing all of your information if that's something that's important to you, if you want to keep this private? Is there a professional? Are there self-help options that you could take advantage of? But it's hugely, hugely important that not trying to do this alone and talking to other people is really one of the messages that we want to get across today. And so one thing that we would encourage people to just give some thought to is, who could you, and this is again an interesting question in COVID, because we all have our our comfort levels around even social distancing and all that kind of stuff. So we're asking this question within the context of the pandemic, but there's lots of different ways of spending time with someone. Spending time can be on the phone. Spending time can be on a Zoom call. Spending time can be, if you're comfortable, taking a socially distanced walk. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that we can do it, but the practice being, could you think of one person in the next week that you could consider spending time with who could be a positive support? We talk a lot in some of our groups about our substance using people, finding individuals, finding the support for themselves, but family members need it just as much, if not equally. They really, really need the support, because this is too hard to do alone. So Kristen Neff, who's cited up here at the top, is a wonderful, wonderful psychologist who, as I mentioned at the beginning, everything that we talk about here is all really based in science and evidence. She is a psychologist who studies self-compassion, and that's really been her work. At the end of this presentation, there's a couple of references, but if you just pop her name into Google real quick, you'll find a lot of, or whatever web search engine you use. I'm not promoting any search engines. If you just do a little research on her name, you'll find that she's written a lot of different books. Some people like Audible books. I have a few people that I've really enjoyed listening to her books on Audible, but she's got a whole bunch of stuff out there on this idea of self-compassion. And she breaks it down into these three components. So the first component is self-kindness versus self-judgment. So all those negative thoughts that we were having when, we were doing or judgmental thoughts that are so easy to notice if we think about some behaviors that we feel shame around, either ourselves or others, right? So that's the judgment part. And then the opposite of that being kindness. So being supportive, gentle, and caring to oneself in times of distress. So not attacking yourselves or anybody else, but since we're talking about self-compassion, not attacking ourselves. So our common humanity, I'm a part of, I am one with versus isolation. So this perspective that allows for the idea that all people make mistakes. I have a group of text chain with some friends, and we We encourage each other to make 3 mistakes a day, and we text when we make one. It's a lot of fun. So all people make mistakes, suffer, and experience hardship in life versus retreating, pulling back, and isolating. So the idea that just making a mistake is normal, right? So anything we've done in the past with our child in our own life, that's totally human, and we were doing the best we can at that time. And then mindfulness versus over-identification. So being aware of painful thoughts and emotions with clarity and balance. So we don't want to, and we know that the brain by nature has a negative bias. There seems to be some survival mechanism in there, but it's unfortunate that our brain has a negative bias. So this part's really about, rather than over-identifying with those negative thoughts that are the default, that we really want to cultivate a sense of mindfulness. So being aware of those painful thoughts and emotions with clarity, not ruminating, not staying stuck in them. So they're going to happen. Those thoughts are going to come up. But with mindfulness, we really learn how to not identify so strongly with them, and it allows us to pull it out. So we might have the thought, but we're able to move away from it and to choose whether or not we want to engage. So self-kindness versus self-judgment. So the first component. So I'm open to hearing from people. What ways can you show your self-care and support in times of distress? And I'll wait and see your thoughts, and then I'll probably add some in too. So in what ways can you show your self-care and support in times of distress?
So I like to get outside, get into nature.
Great one. It's really, really, it's just changes your consciousness, right? Just changes the way that you are feeling and thinking by getting out into nature. Terrific. Rebecca, is there anything you wanted to share?
I like to take naps.
Naps. I was thinking that too. Naps are great, right? Right. And I think, sometimes if we're real doers, it can be hard to just kind of lie down for a few minutes. And I think when things are getting really, really intense, that can be a really important skill, just to allow ourselves to rest and to recover a little bit. Allowing ourselves to talk about what's going on, which we just talked about. I think remembering to eat, having healthful foods, hydrating, drinking water, can even be a way of sort of showing care and kindness to our bodies. Watching something pleasurable. I really love like all the movies with beautiful costumes and like period films, and it's just so beautiful to see something that's done with such artistry. So, I think the first part of this is just recognizing that we're in distress. And once we do that, figuring out, okay, so this is how I'm feeling right now, and how can I show myself kindness? Rather than saying, why can't I handle it? Why can't I do more? I really need to be doing this. I'm supposed to be doing that. Takeout. It's just one of the things that I'm thinking, as mom, like sometimes I just don't feel like making dinner. I'm tired. It's been a long week, and a pizza on a Friday night or something can really just be this opportunity to say, like, no, I don't want to do the dishes. I don't want to cook. I don't want to clean. We're just going to have pizza, right? So, or something else tasty. That's not what we're good for. So common humanity versus isolation. In what ways can you move away from isolation and connect with others? Thoughts on this? It can be a hard one. I mean, a couple of the things that are coming to mind for me are any kind of groups that we might belong to. So even if we're not going to use our connections, I'd say being here today is a great example. But if any groups that we belong to, whether or not they're specific to substance use, just having ways in which we're connecting to other people is really, really important. So maybe that's a group through a church or a synagogue or a community center. And again, a lot of this stuff is online these days, but you know, many of us are finding that these Zoom meetings are really a lifeline. Maybe taking a class or being a part of like a fitness community or but you know, spending time with family. But it's just really, really important. And you know, one of the skills we talk about is opposite action. And you know, I think that when we're feeling shame, the instinct is to pull away. And so when that's happening, we really want to use some of that opposite action and to move toward. Right? So when that impulse is to move away, we want to move toward. And finally, mindfulness versus over-identification. So what strategies can you use to acknowledge the negative chatter, but not let it be the judge and jury of you? So we talked about this idea kind of in the beginning that we don't want to take the feelings and the thoughts and just ignore them. But on the other end of the continuum, we don't want to overindulge them, over-identify, spend all day thinking and feeling and ruminating around them. We want to be able to sort of move in and out of tending to those feelings. So are there strategies, and if so, what are they, that people have found helpful for allowing yourself, because you know, the idea of just letting go of a thought, it's a much bigger task than it sounds like. Are there strategies that people have found that are helpful for being mindful but not over identifying? Rebecca?
Maybe talking about it.
Yeah.
Talking to someone that you trust, or you know, like I have some friends, like you know, whenever there's something that I'm going through, like these are always the people that I always reach out to consult with, or you know, to just acknowledge how I'm feeling.
Terrific, right?
Discuss what's going on. Mm-hmm.
That's terrific. So you know, by putting some light on it, it decreases it, right? When we hold it inside, there's this, you know, it's like the soda bottle, right? When you hold it inside and you hold it inside and all that carbonation's building up, it just can kind of explode. But when we open that soda bottle really gently and we let out a little bit at a time, which is exactly what you're talking about, by having that conversation, then we don't get to that point where we're just kind of stuck feeling overwhelmed by these feelings. Yeah. Amy?
I just do breath work.
Great. Is there something specific that you found is helpful around breath work for you?
I just do, like I'll just count. So, and then pause at the top and then count on my exhale.
Great.
So that helps.
It really does, right? So it's kind of retraining that brain to stay in the moment. You know, by default, our brains are kind of popping all over the place. And when we do this breath work, or these mindfulness and other kind of meditation practices, we're working on rewiring that brain so it has the capacity to let go of thoughts more easily. So kindness practices from peers. So awareness and allowing. Sit with my husband each week, get on the same page, share perceptions. I stop my car to literally smell the roses at the park each day. So these are different things and different ideas that we've collected over time that have been shared with us as personal examples. So again, this top one, sitting with my husband each week, getting on the same page, sharing perceptions, right? Like, so that's that idea of like, you know, really using and connecting with the people that are around us as a way to stay aware of what we're experiencing and allowing our feelings to come up. Calming. So here we are with nature a little bit, right? Take walks each morning by myself, the only time I can breathe. And this is such a great example because, you know, I think, if we're asking too much of people in terms of self-compassion, self-care, it's going to be easy to say it's not doable because it might actually not be. But this, you know, this person here talks about just doing it in the morning, right? Before anybody's up, just getting up, getting outside, taking a walk, fresh, crisp air. Antidepressant medication, life-changing, right? So using medical support, psychotherapy, having a psychiatrist, like this is real. Like the levels of depression and anxiety in family members of people with substance use are really significant. And so medication for some people can be a really important piece of self-care. And meditation, we were just talking about breath work, meditation, never thought I would. I like that. You know, I mean, there's so many people meditating. Fortunately, it's moved into a much more common practice. And, you know, I mean, Headspace even, you know, offered itself free to people during this pandemic, people who were laid off from work. And it's such a great practice. And it can be as little as 5 minutes. But it really can be the thing that allows you to just start to separate from your thoughts. So having limits. Stayed in a hotel instead of my daughter's house when visiting, right? I've experienced this with so many people, having this like life-changing experience, visiting family or loved ones by just saying, I need my space, and that's okay, right? So when visiting, just staying in a hotel, there's this feeling of obligation, like I have to do the right thing. The right thing is to stay with her. And for this particular person, staying in her daughter's house did not feel like it was healthy for her. And so she visited her because that was important to her and she loves her, but she allowed herself permission to stay in a hotel. We left the family Christmas celebration early. We talk about this with people a lot. Like, if you've got your limits around how much substance use is happening and things start to make you uncomfortable, you are absolutely welcome to leave at any time. And we often encourage people to plan ahead and to cope ahead and to anticipate what they might encounter and even have an exit strategy. And this is both for family as well as people who are trying to make changes around their substance use, right? So the limits section really deals with, I think, a lot of the shoulds, that I'm supposed to be doing this, I should be doing this way, this is the way a mom is supposed to be, or a dad's supposed to be, or a partner's supposed to be, but those shoulds really get us in trouble. And they can be the opposite of self-compassion sometimes. So in this situation, there's too much use going on. We're going to leave the Christmas celebration early. We're going to go, but we're going to leave early. I don't talk to my son when he's high. So this is a natural consequence, right? That you can, which we'll talk about in one of the later sessions about natural consequences, is actually one of the topics embedded in the behavior skills. But withdrawing attention can be very powerful, right? And we're not going to do this with with anger, hopefully, although it's easy for that to happen, and we can hold the self-compassion when it does. But just quietly walking away and separating, right? They come home and they're intoxicated. You can go to your room. That's okay. I talk about this one with partners, and that's something that they pick up on. And then the opposite of that then really becomes making sure to spend time and to be around when your loved one is sober, so that you're really reinforcing that behavior that you want to see. Fun. I love that we get to talk about fun. So go out with my girlfriends once a month, rain or shine. Again, we're in a situation where that might be different. Maybe it's a Zoom call. Maybe there's, again, like a class you can take together. Maybe you are comfortable going out socially distanced and sitting outside at a park or a restaurant, but doing things that feel fun to you. Escape to the movies alone with popcorn and butter. That sounds really wonderful, and one day movie theaters will be opening again. But maybe it's just watching a movie on Netflix, right? Everybody's out of the house. You're home by yourself. It's Friday night, and you're tempted to like get that one last thing done, get a head start on the laundry, clean up the room, do the dishes, but like, what's it like to just kind of sit down on the couch and watch something that that's fun, or that's interesting, or that's exciting, like just doing that for yourself and giving yourself that permission. And then finally, connection. Check in and update my sister twice a week, even when I'm down. So this includes a little bit of accountability, like letting people know that maybe we're struggling. And so kind of setting up something like a check-in with somebody so that they can help to recognize if we're slipping down a slope of isolation, and they can help to kind of pull us back in. So making sure if there's people that you feel like you could connect with in a scheduled way, that can help you to be more likely to do it. Going to the parent support group at my church each week. So you're here today. This is just such a great example of like showing up for yourself, connecting to other people, connecting to the material, and just not doing this alone. Okay. Wow. I've never seen that happen. That's very exciting. So practice, practice, practice. So as I mentioned in the beginning, this middle slide, it lives here in the middle of the wheel, because it is really important with all these skills, because they're new, they're different, they might feel uncomfortable, that we really practice. So we're going to talk a little bit about practicing. Before I move on to that, does anyone have any thoughts about that last slide, about any of these examples here, or any different kind of kindness practices that you want to add, or any struggles you've had around implementing kindness practices towards yourself? Amy, we're going to say something there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I feel like the limits is really hard.
It is.
Because you actually are visibly making a statement. By staying in a hotel, you have to have that conversation with your daughter, and it may not go well.
Yep.
And leaving the Christmas party, same thing.
Yep.
Or just like you were saying, not talking to your, not talking to your son while he's high. He comes into the house, and like you said, he could be intoxicated, and it automatically flares your anger. That's a tough one. I can see that being a tough one.
You're absolutely right. Thank you for saying that. Limits are really, really hard. And I just had someone that I work with individually I've been trying to help him for years in staying in a hotel when he visits his parents. And it's not around substance use. It's just specifically around boundaries. And he did it for the first time, and it was thrilling. So he had all this fear about how terrible it was going to be, and how much everyone was going to react. And sometimes people do. But in this situation, they didn't. And what has actually happened is that it's allowed him this opportunity to now do it the next time, right? Because it's now establishing this new norm. And sometimes people do notice, right? But I think that's okay. And in some ways that falls into that bucket of natural consequences too, right? If everyone's going to get really wasted, I can't be here. That doesn't feel good to me, right? So you're communicating something, you're withdrawing the attention. And it's hard. It can be really effective. And it's possible that the next time, maybe there might be, maybe there won't, but maybe there'll be some thoughtfulness around, or maybe the person will ask, we noticed you left early, what happened? You may or may not decide at that point to say, I'm just, when the substance use gets that heavy and people start saying things that are maybe hurtful, I don't feel comfortable anymore, so I have to go. And you may or may not, feel good saying that, but it's a space where you can start to open up conversations, and you can start to allow for a little bit of a shift, right? Because by staying, you're actually reinforcing the behavior. You're making it likely that it's going to happen again. And so we want to withdraw from a behavioral perspective. We want to withdraw the reinforcement. The reinforcement's your attention. But you're right, they're hard. I have a friend who says, like, if you feel guilty, then you're probably doing the right thing when it comes to setting limits, right? Because if it's hard, then that means you're probably engaging in some self-care. Thank you for bringing that up, and that's actually very self-compassionate to say this is hard. It's a hard one.
I think a very important word that you mentioned was boundaries. Being able to set those and have limits and things like that. That's really important, especially for your health or self-care and things like that. Just having those boundaries in place.
Absolutely. And they are a form of self-care, right? Boundaries are a form of self-compassion, of kindness to ourselves. And, I really like to talk to people about, like, really tuning in with their body, like, because it might show up in your thoughts, but it might also show up in your body. Like, is your chest starting to get a little tight? Are you starting to feel like you need to pace around a little bit? Are you, are you kind of noticing that you're going to the bathroom a lot because you don't want to be there, and so you kind of disappear into the bathroom, which can be a way of taking a break too, and that can be effective. But, like, what's your body telling you in terms of how you're feeling and what you need and what kind of a boundary or limit that you need to set? Okay, so there's that very cool floating square again. Practice makes progress. I think that's very sweet. We don't have to be perfect. What a relief. We get to make all those mistakes that we talked about. It's just how we get better, though, right? So we don't want to give up practice because it's how we make progress, but we don't ever have to get to perfect. So this is kind of the context, the world that we're living in, the thing that a lot of our family members report hearing. We've tried everything, nothing works. Why can't he, why can't she just do that? Why can't they just do the right thing? It's so discouraging when nothing changes. We never seem to get this right. If only we were better parents. So you can feel and hear sort of the discouragement, the blame, self-blame, the frustration, the fear. We have lots of dog slides because dogs are so cute. We can just never seem to get this right. If only we were better parents. And as I said, like, I've seen so many good parents. Addiction does not discriminate at all. It affects all kinds of families. And that said, there's still skills that we can use that can help. It's just that there's nothing that really comes from self-blame. So a new perspective. Evidence says there's hope out there. And in my many years working in the field, I've seen a lot of change. So as we think about the changes that our loved ones and us are trying to make, we need to remember that behaviors are complex, right? So in one of the sessions a couple weeks ago, we talked about the behavioral analysis. So the before, during, and after of use, right? So the use itself is one behavior, but it sits in this context of a lot of complexity. And, you know, the example, Amy, that you just said about the child comes in high and you feel frustrated. And so it's not just that moment, right? It's the week you've had at work. It's how much sleep you got. It's what's going on financially, what's happening with your other children, in your marriage, in your job. So that behavior, that moment with the child happens in a context. It doesn't just happen sort of on its own. And we need to remember that the behaviors are very complex and they exist in a context. So change comes by addition and not subtraction. Ken Carpenter, who is one of the founders of one of the sort of developers of this protocol in our foundation, and a psychologist who's been in the field for a long time, he always talks about this so well because he has a lot of understanding of learning and learning theory. And I love when he talks about the fact that we can't unlearn things, right? So when a child learns that getting high feels a certain way, we can't unlearn that, right? When we learn that certain actions lead to certain outcomes, we can't unlearn that. But what we can do, and sometimes that can make people feel a little hopeless, but it's not. But I think it's important in terms of validating our loved ones and why their change is so difficult. What we can do is we can add in and we can create new pathways. So learning and change come by addition. So when we leave that party, right, we're creating a new learning experience. When we walk away and someone's high, we're giving them that opportunity to learn something, right? To learn, oh, my family doesn't want to be around me when I'm stoned. And that comes by having new experiences in the world. That's how our learning happens. Practice is the progress of change by adding. That's kind of what I just said. Adding new things can feel awkward. We're going to do a little experiment. If you can't do it now, you can do it later. It's a lot of fun. But we're going to practice briefly doing something new and how awkward it feels. I think sometimes, you know, as adults, we don't necessarily get the opportunity to try new things all the time, but it does. You feel really awkward when you're doing something new. And so we have to keep that in mind, that as our children are trying to socialize sober or do their homework without binging on stimulants, or they're having to try to make new friends because all of their friends are really heavy into use, then they're going to feel awkward about that. And it's important for us to remember and to support and facilitate that. And the same for us when we're trying to talk to our kids in a new way, or we're trying to leave that party, or we're trying to walk out of the room because we don't like the way someone's talking to us. That's going to feel uncomfortable. I mean, Amy, you spoke to that, right? You're like, that sounds really hard. It is hard, and it's going to feel that way. And the more we do it, the easier it gets. But I think there's that self-compassion and just acknowledging this feels awkward. Oh, most of us suck at new things. I like that. And stumble in learning them. We have a little cartoon coming up in the beginning that kind of shows how we stumble and fall along the way, right? Like if you can picture a toddler sort of learning to walk, they get up and they fall down, and they get up and they fall down, and they don't get frustrated. They just like keep doing it. But somehow as we get older, and that judgmental part of our brain kicks in, we start to kind of get mad at ourselves when we're trying new things. But this is all going to be really clumsy. It's going to be. It's going to be messy. Practicing over time and with patience and with compassion is the key. So the more that we practice these different ways of taking care of ourselves, the more we practice the understandings that you talked about next week and the new behaviors that we're going to talk about over the next couple of weeks, the more likely it is that we're just going to get better at them, and they're going to start to be the default, right? But we have to practice. Compassion. for others and ourselves. So there's a little image, stumbling in positive change. Martial arts masters don't train their students not to fall. They train them how to fall, because we all stumble and fall. How you fall affects how you get up. Falling with care and compassion versus crash landing is key to being able to get back up. Being able to get back up is what matters for the long haul, right? So we talked in the beginning about this being a marathon and not a sprint. And because of that, we really need to think about being in this for the long haul. And if we don't care for ourselves and have compassion for ourselves, we're going to have a crash landing, right? We're going to be that exploding soda bottle. We're going to, and then we'll maybe feel bad about ourselves. So we want to just be thoughtful and be mindful about how we fall, right? And so as we're caring for ourselves along the way, we just allow less opportunity for a crash landing and more opportunity for one of these really beautiful and graceful falls done by this martial artist, right? And I think we can share this with our family members as well, as they're trying to make a change process. It's not linear. Slips happen. People, and it doesn't mean that someone's not motivated. It means that there could have been a certain set of circumstances on that particular day that led to that outcome. So we don't need to assume that someone's not motivated, right? Having that fall, and then how that person lifts back up, how they recover from that fall, is such a great example of this idea that families can have a tremendous impact. The more compassion and kindness and curiosity rather than anger and judgment and attack, which are completely understandable, but those prior feelings really allow our kids to want to come back and talk to us the next time when something happens. Conflict shuts down communication, and compassion and curiosity and love open communication. And the more we're taking care of ourselves, the more we're going to be able to show up in that moment for our loved one in the way that we want to. And that's really hard to do when we're tired, hungry, haven't talked to anybody, isolated. When all those things happen, we're just less likely to behave in a way that's consistent with our values. So any thoughts about that, about this process of change and the fact that we make some mistakes along the way? And so how knowing this helps, right? Understanding that change requires practice. It allows family members to be better able to empathize and practice patience with their loved ones' up and downs as they attempt to make change. There are going to be setbacks. There are going to be struggles. So if we understand that first, that's why so much of this work is really about changing how we understand things, changing our awareness so that we can be better able to help. It helps families see change as a process of learning and adding new behaviors and responses, not taking away, one second, I might just scoot our little photos out of the way here, not taking away bad behaviors, right? So we're adding in new behaviors, we're learning new behaviors. If your child loves music, right, you want to offer some music lessons so that they can have something else to do on Friday night when all of their friends are hanging out and smoking pot. Would that be something they'd be interested in? If your child loves, doing creative projects, is that something that you could talk about, like how to bring some of that back into their life again? Really this is something that's led from them, but we want to think with them collaboratively about what other new things can we add in to create a full life for you. We don't want to just get rid of the bad. We want to add in the new. And there's this one of these slides in our weekend training that is about, it's a garden, right? And it's a garden without stuff in it, and then a garden with stuff added. And we want to be the garden where we're adding stuff to it, right? So some of those plants that we don't really care for as much, they're still there, but now the garden is full with all of these other beautiful items. Welcome to people who are joining us. So knowing all this helps us to create it gives family members permission to not be perfect in their own attempts at trying new ways of helping. So a dose of self-compassion. So to go back to that example of withdrawing attention from a child who is high and maybe walking into another room. So maybe you know this and you're excited and you're planning to practice it this weekend and you feel like it has the potential to be something that's helpful for you. And that child walks in the door and they're high and you go right back to screaming. And that's the behavior that you're absolutely trying not to do. It's okay, right? It's okay. So understanding that we're not going to be perfect. This is going to take time. And even maybe by it not working that first time, it might help you strategize around, okay, it didn't work. So what do I need to do next time? Do I need to ask him to text ahead before he comes home? Do I need to put a little Post-it on the back of the door to remind myself, some kind of mantra? Do I need to jot something down on my hand and say, be nice, walk away? What is it that I need to help me remember to stick to that skill? Because it's going to take time, right? We're going to make mistakes. Helps create a more compassionate, helping context where there is room for imperfections and stumbling when learning new things. So the family being a context. If the context of our family can be, we make mistakes, I make mistakes, you make mistakes, dad makes mistakes, mom makes mistakes, sister and brother make mistakes, the dogs make mistakes, right? If that can sort of be the context, and like when that happens, how do we react? What do we do about it, right? When you have a little kid and they fall down and they scrape their knee, like you might sometimes run and pick them up. But if you're finding that they're being like really, really kind of dramatic about it, you might also want them to learn that it's okay, that they don't need that, right? And that you might say, it's okay, you're going to be okay, right? So you might do something differently the next time. So there's all different kinds of ways that we can create this sense of compassion around learning, but that's really what we want to try to do in the family. And I know it's a big ask when we're afraid and when we're hurt. And, our kids have the potential to do some things that terrify us, that hurt us. And again, we're in a marathon. So we really want to keep those lines of communication open. We really want them to know that they're loved and cared for, and that we're working as a team. So knowing this also helps promote the idea that behavior changes with behavior changes. So until we practice doing these things repeatedly, we're just by nature going to keep doing the things that we used to do. If my door lock worked so that I always turn the key to the right, and then they had to change the lock for some reason, and I come home, and every time I try to unlock the door, I'm turning it to the right, but this time with the new lock, I actually have to turn it to the left. It's going to take me, and for me, it's probably going to take several times, but it's going to take a couple times, right? To really remember, like, oh, right, okay, now I have to turn it to the left. That's going to take some time because I've got all this old learning there that it happened. So I have to keep repeating the behavior, repeat, and that's how behavior change happens. Okay, so in your packet, you have some exercises. And the first one is, I always find this one kind of fun. I liked school a lot. So I like thinking back to teachers. But it could be a teacher from while you're in school. It could be a exercise teacher. It could be someone you've taken a class with as an adult. It really could be any teacher you've had in your life. So if you've got a pen and a piece of paper, or you can use your phone if you don't have a pen and a piece of paper, you can just jot it down on your phone if you want on the notes section and delete it afterward if you would rather, or you can just think about it if you don't have any of those things available. You can just think about it. So I want you to take a moment to think about mentors or managers. I forgot that managers were included in this too, so it doesn't have to be a teacher. A manager is a type of teacher. Or bosses that you've had in your life. And I'd like you to contemplate a mentor that didn't help you get along in the world or get along in that work environment. Someone that you just didn't feel very good around. And also, I would like you to contemplate a mentor that did help you get along in the world, or in your job, or in your class, or this could also be like a therapist or a religious counselor. And as you're thinking about those people, I'd like you to list out some adjectives and behaviors that describe each person. Okay, so take a few moments and think about it, or write it down. Okay, so, and as we do this, we're going to think, I'm going to ask if people are interested in sharing. I'm going to ask you to think a little bit about, to discuss the differences in these two people. This says types of people. We could go with types of people, or we could just kind of say the difference in these, the qualities of these two particular people. So what did people come up with?
So I'll be the first to share mine.
Thanks.
So the person that I worked with was an assistant principal, and he was somebody that sort of had a negative impact on me. He was very self-absorbed, he just sort of wanted the spotlight on himself. Wasn't really much for encouraging, was more interested in being heard rather than listened to. And in the same school, my principal was the opposite. This person was very encouraging, wanted me to go back to school to get my master's, and he actually wanted to mentor me personally. He was kind, and he was a good listener.
Wow, so interesting that they were both in the same place.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, what a great contrast, right? And working so closely together, right? And then what did you feel like in those two different relationships? Like how did you feel differently?
Well, I knew obviously who I could go to if I needed to get something done.
Mm-hmm.
The assistant principal, he and I just didn't gel. I think he felt, because I am somebody that is, I have a strong will and I speak up for myself, and I just don't think he knew how to handle that kind of energy. Mm-hmm. Whereas I just could relate better to the principal. They both were males.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, and one
so
was
wasn't a gender difference, right?
No. What was interesting was that the principal was an older man, and the assistant principal was like, he kind of like wanted to prove himself.
Huh.
So there was a lot of ego there.
Yep, certainly, right? And it's interesting to hear, like you said, this is the person I would go to, right? Because I mean, you know, the parallel here in a way is that, like, you know, we are in some ways and in many ways our child's teachers, right? And so if we really want to have a relationship and we want them to come to us, there's different ways in which we respond when they have struggles, and that sets the stage for how willing they are to come back to us.
Right.
Thanks, Amy. Anyone else like to share around this?
So my first supervisor out of graduate school was amazing. She was encouraging. She was, she kind of helped me learn the ropes. And I always, I didn't have any concern talking with her or going to her for any concerns that I have. And I really considered her a friend as well, even till after I left, I would still call her. And then, when I left, I was very sad leaving because of her, because she was such a wonderful person to work with. And, she would be, she would tell me like it is too. And I appreciated that. My second supervisor was just the exact opposite. And I considered her to be somewhat of a bully and was not encouraging. I tried my best to avoid her at all costs. Thankfully, we weren't in the same building. And, it was definitely not a pleasant experience. And she was my supervisor for a good 11 years or so before she finally retired. And in that time,
Wow.
I really didn't even call her for anything unless I really, really needed her. And it was very rare, unless it was like evaluation time or whatever. But it was, I did not consider her as a friend, and I truly avoided her at all costs. She embarrassed me in one of the meetings when I raised my hand and I asked her to repeat something. And she's like, well, don't you have ears? I just said it.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was new and young in the game. And, I was just like, okay, never again will I ask a question in staff meeting. I'd rather not know,
Wow.
So, it's interesting, that you're right. If you put up that barrier, people won't come to you,
Exactly. Right. Like 11 years and you have, right. That's a long time to avoid somebody.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry you had to work in that environment for that long. That's really,
Yeah. Well, it's been 25 years now
okay.
since I've been there. So,
Okay.
thankfully I didn't let her discourage me, and
Good.
quit,
Good.
So.
Yeah. I mean, but so I wanted to really, write down, if I wish I had a whiteboard in front of me and I didn't know if the chat would work to do this, but to write down some of the key words that you're talking about, right? Like I heard encouraging, like that's such an important word of what we're talking about, right? And like, and what our kids and loved ones need to hear when they're struggling with substance use, because there's so much internalized shame. It's just tremendous. And, a lot of times by their lives are kind of starting to fall apart potentially a little bit. They're seeing consequences, and they really, really need our encouragement. It's a very important word. Rebecca, did you want to share anything?
So I've also had same experience with some supporting supervisors and some that weren't so supporting. Sometimes where you discuss things of concern, it seems like it's like one ear out the other, not really listening, or I don't know, like especially in the workforce, like favoritism, things like that. They don't make you feel comfortable to talk to someone. Whereas I've had another that, are there to promote growth or help you, where areas where you can learn or be a better, learn more like encouraging, supporting, like those are more, that's a person that I would be willing more to talk to.
Yep, absolutely.
Something or anything that's going on.
Absolutely, right? So your willingness to talk to someone who
Right.
you feel good when you're in a conversation with them, right? We'll talk, I don't know, it might even be next week. I'm going to be here next week and we're talking about, I think it's communication skills next week, but like, how to say things, because there's such an impulse to, how could you do that again? And I mean, right? But what that does is that shuts off that valve of communication, as you're all saying, right? We really want to keep it open, be curious. What happened? What are you talking about? Like how you got there? So using curiosity, right? And encouraging, like, I know you can do this. Like, it's really, really hard, right? But that motivates our behavior. Punishment is negatively associated with motivation. It's the most common form of like discipline that's used. But the research shows that positive reinforcement is so much more powerful in motivating behavior than punishment. Punishment actually demotivates people. It extinguishes the behavior in the short term, but it damages the relationship, and ultimately it doesn't have the same kind of holding power that positive reinforcement does. And that's one thing that was consistent, I think, across what everybody was saying, is it was someone that was encouraging and really, wanted me to go for further education, and they really made me feel good about myself, and how different of an experience that is. So one more exercise here around practice. So practice is the effort that makes things possible. So let's see, so I'm gonna go back here. So what I would like you to do, I think you have this one in your exercises as well, you may not, but I'd like you to think about the sentence, practice is the effort that makes things possible. And if you have in front of you or near you that piece of paper that we keep needing today and a pen, if not, if you have any writing instruments, if you don't have a writing instrument and a piece of paper and you have your phone, maybe you can use only one hand to do this instead of typing two thumbed on your phone. So what I want you to do, if you have a piece of paper, is to write out the sentence, practice is the effort that makes things possible. But I want you to do that with your non-dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, do it with your left hand. If you're left-handed, do it with your right hand. If you by chance are able to write with both hands, pick whichever one's harder for you or you use less often. And if you don't have a pen and piece of paper, maybe again, like grab your phone, do a note in your phone, send a text to yourself or something. Try to use maybe just one hand, one finger, maybe turn your phone upside down so that you can't see your keyboard as easily. Do something to make it a little bit hard for yourself and see what happens. Maybe a few moments on that. This is also an exercise that we do in some of our groups and that I've done personally a couple years ago when I first joined the foundation to start doing and leading and teaching some of these trainings. So I have direct experience with this exercise. So what did you notice? What came up?
Well, I'm not done.
Right, things take longer, right?
Right.
How far did you get, Amy?
I finished things.
Okay, all right, so you got through several words,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Great job.
And possible has two S's, and the S's I find quite challenging. So
I can imagine wanting to rotate those and write them the other way. That would
yeah.
Right. So when we're learning things, it takes longer. Did you notice any thoughts or feelings like I want to quit, or this is uncomfortable, or this looks terrible? Those are some of the things that I probably thought when I did it for the first time. Donna, any reactions? And did you have a chance to give it a try? Okay, so I'll just share that, yeah, some of the things that I just said, that my experiences were, I'm terrible at this. I noticed very quickly that I wanted to quit. It didn't feel good to be that bad. I noticed that maybe I had expectations of myself, that somehow that my left hand, I'm right-handed, that somehow my left hand would be as skillful as my right hand, even though there's no reason to imagine why that would be true. It just wouldn't be. I've practiced my right hand since I learned to use a utensil to a writing tool. So, this is just a little illustration for all of us to remember that when we're trying new things, the other thing I'll say about this is that even though it's not your dominant hand, as you practice it, you do get better at it, right? You may not ever be as easy and natural as it is with your dominant hand, but you can definitely get better at it. So I just like this illustration as an opportunity to remind ourselves of how hard it is to learn new things, how hard it is to try something that kind of feels like the opposite of what we're used to, and how nicely that ties into compassion for ourselves and compassion for our loved ones.
So I just added a little bit more of a challenge. I just tried to do it in cursive. And,
Ooh.
yeah, and I wanted to give up. I didn't even get through the first word. I was like, I'm not doing this. So
That's amazing. I love that you remember cursive. I don't even know if I can write cursive with my right hand anymore. Maybe that will be my challenge today. Is exactly, how do I write in cursive anymore? Terrific. So great feedback. So this is just the debrief. We just did a little bit about this. Let's see, what kind of support or coaching, kind of tying that back into the discussion that we just had about my best teacher, right? So that word encouraging, like if someone was, you're doing great, you're doing a really good job, keep it going, like positive reinforcement, it's so helpful for people, for all of us. As humans, we are incredibly motivated by positive reinforcement. What kind of coaching would not have been helpful? Over controlling, criticism, micromanaging, nonverbal communications that have like a judgmental quality to them, strong emotional reactions, frustration, right? So all of those things that are easy to have happen when your child is struggling around substances or a loved one struggling, all of those things are going to be the things that are connected to decreasing somebody's motivation. So even if they're the default, they're going to demotivate that person. So we really want to try to take that stance of encouraging and just finding all the good that people are doing, even if it's glacial, as we say sometimes. So that is bringing us close to the end here. I just want to check in and see before we kind of get to these daily intentions if there's anything that anyone had questions about. Donna, I know you joined us partway through. Everything's being recorded, so if you want to jump back and get the early part, it's there. Any thoughts, questions, comments, feelings? Okay, so this is a really, really important topic. I encourage you to spend some time with it. And at the end of each session, one of the things that we do is to think about some daily intentions for ourselves, which go along with a lot of this self-compassion. So what's a kindness that I can show in the next day? So we'll leave that as something for you to think about. What's kindness I can show? And I might even say to myself in the next day, since we were talking about self-compassion today, what did I appreciate today? So we want to enjoy what there is to enjoy, even when things are really, really difficult, which it has been for a lot of people over the last 6 months, and which is only deeply compounded for families who are dealing with a loved one's substance use issues. But within that, what is something that I can say that I appreciated today? Even if it was my cup of coffee, I'm looking over at my dog with his belly up in the air and his little paws, and I appreciate his cuteness very much. So it can be something as little as that, right? Just finding that thing that we appreciate. And then connecting with yourself. Remember what matters to you. What do you feel proud of today? What's one thing you can feel proud of? Maybe it's showing up for this today. Maybe it's that you remembered to have lunch when that's been really hard lately because you've been so busy. Maybe it's because you learned something new or you tried something new. So what is one thing that you feel proud of today? And these are different questions that we can keep in a journal, we can keep on our phone, we can keep it anywhere that feels helpful to us. We can just think about them. But it's an effort to kind of rewire some of that negative thinking a little bit so that we can have more positive self-talk. So here's some additional resources. So I mentioned Dr. Kristen Neff. This is one particular resource. Is it self-indulgent to be self-compassionate? This is one resource, but she has a whole bunch of stuff that she's written on self-compassion. It's all based in science. It's all based in research. It's really, really great work. And again, some of it's on Audible. So if you're not someone who can sit down with books too often, but you drive and you can listen to it in your car or on your headset when you're getting ready to go to bed. It's a really great stuff by Kristen Neff, and the science behind how we learn skills. So just the fact that everything that we're talking about here is an attempt to build new skills, and it's all based on science. So finally, here are some additional resources. So the CMC, Center for Motivation and Change, our Foundation for Change is our nonprofit. And if you click on this, well, you can't click on the link, but if you go to this link, there will be information for you there. There's training resources, additional readings, and handouts on some of the different topics that we've talked about today, all available on the CMC Foundation for Change website, cmcffc.org. And just to review the wheel, we did a section from helping with awareness today, self-compassion, and we're going to jump over to the action session next week, and we're going to be talking about communication skills. So you'll understand what the red and green lights are and the sandwich by the end of next week. So I hope that a lot of you are able to join us. And just want to thank you for being with us today, for spending your time, for being a part of our community. And if you're listening to this as a recording, thank you also for being here and for taking the time. We really, as we mentioned in the beginning, our mission is to help families and to change the conversation around addiction and to create a sense of community. So thank you for helping us in that mission and for being a part of this training today. So thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.